So this reflection is about multicultural education. One of the documents that we had to look at gives a big, detailed description of what multicultural education is. Just to simplify things, this is the definition that I'm going with. It's education without putting one culture or cultural ideal above another in importance or status. Multicultural education can present a problem, especially when teaching U.S. history or world history by the Virginia SOLs, as they seem to define multicultural education as let's mention a black guy here, or let's find a female example of this. Such forced inclusion is not multicultural education. I think doing it that way only trivializes the contributions and accomplishments that a lot of people have made. Something else I feel that I need to mention is ridiculing or belittling people about their culture's dominance of another at some point is not multicultural education either. Even though this often happens as well. I actually had a student during an exercise almost begin to make fun of me because of one of the documents that I used. I did an inquiry into some documents regarding slavery. One of those documents was an estate inventory from 1858 that listed out the value of the 13 slaves this particular person owned. The person in question that owned these slaves was my great-great-grandfather. Now, when the student initially found out that I had owned these slaves, or that my family had owned these slaves, the first words out of her mouth was, "Your family owns slaves? How dare you even talk about slavery?" That's not the way to go about it. So we ended up in a discussion about it. The gist of the discussion was that I did not own slaves. This was one of my ancestors who did. I did not necessarily feel the same way that my ancestors felt about it, any more than her ancestors, or than she felt the same way that her ancestors felt about any given thing. We discussed it back and forth for a few minutes, and we came to a consensus that, we're not our ancestors. So therefore, even though we may resemble them, we do not necessarily believe the same things that they did. She was able to see that I was not the same as my ancestors, but knee-jerk reactions like that happen a great deal, and I think in large part those knee-jerk reactions are a product of the overemphasis on addressing some of the isms that we come across: racism, classism, ageism, name it, ism. Some of the isms of life rather than how to solve them. We talk about how to address certain things, but we don't really talk about how to solve anything with it. We talk about, this needs to be mentioned, this needs to be discussed, this needs to be talked about. Doesn't it need to be solved? Is that not an option to solve something? when it comes to some of these ideas. Such an over discussion of oppression a lot of times only serves to build up an environment of resentment and outrage at a culture that is dominant or once was dominant, and hesitation to take the dominated culture seriously. It only serves to further divide people if multicultural education is not done properly. I think the way that a lot of people are doing it now, where they are forcing some of these connections, where they are not necessarily owning, but where they're not acknowledging their own culture's role in certain things, and where they are not acknowledging some of the anger and the upset of other cultures, and rather than examining cultures for what they are, they're getting caught up in the emotion of it, I guess is what I'm getting at. They're getting caught up in the emotion of it, and by doing that, they're doing their culture and the cultures they're studying at all a disservice, because they're getting caught up in the emotional rhetoric of it and not really examining these different cultures for what they are. They're not getting an accurate picture of them. And isn't that what we as educators are supposed to be doing, is giving an accurate picture of the world around us? I don't know. Just some things to think about. Multicultural education, is it good or bad? It's good if it's done right, and it's horrible if it's done wrong. Something to remember.